The group chat notification popped up on my phone at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing flight schedules for our new Paris route from my office on the 60th floor of Skyline Tower, watching planes take off from San Francisco International through my floor-to-ceiling windows. Martinez Family Paris Trip 2024. That was the chat name. How thoughtful of them to include the year, as if this were going to be an annual tradition worth documenting. So excited for our family trip to Paris next month, my sister Isabella had written. First-class tickets booked for Mom, Dad, me and Roberto. My brother Roberto followed immediately. Can't wait. Going to be amazing having the whole family together in the City of Light. Then came the message that made me set down my coffee. We're going to Paris without you, Elena. Sorry, but you can't afford first class anyway, and we didn't want anyone to feel left out or uncomfortable. This from my mother, Carmen Martinez, delivered with the casual cruelty she'd perfected over the past 5 years since I'd left the family's traditional path to pursue what she called my aviation obsession. I scrolled up through the chat history, reading months of messages about family dinners I wasn't invited to, business celebrations I wasn't included in, and constant references to how Elena is going through a difficult phase with her little airline hobby. My phone buzzed with more messages. Isabella. Plus, let's be honest, Elena would probably just complain about the service or try to explain how airlines work to everyone. So awkward. Roberto. Remember when she tried to tell us about her pilot training at Christmas? So embarrassing. Mom and Dad looked mortified. Dad chimed in, we love Elena, but this trip is about celebrating real success. Isabella's law firm promotion, Roberto's medical practice expansion. Family achievements we can be proud of. Mom, Elena will understand. She's always been the practical one. She knows she doesn't fit in with this kind of luxury travel. I stared at my phone, then looked around my executive office. The walls were covered with photos from the past 7 years. My first solo flight, the day I bought my first aircraft, the ribbon-cutting ceremony when Skyline Airlines launched magazine covers featuring the Sky Queen, my industry nickname after becoming the youngest woman to build a major airline from scratch. On my desk sat the latest issue of Aviation Weekly with my photo on the cover. Skyline Airlines revolutionizes luxury travel, so Elena Martinez's $8 billion empire takes flight. I typed a simple response, have fun. 3 minutes later my assistant David knocked on the door. Ms. Martinez? Your 3 p.m. is here. Cancel it, I said, still staring at the group chat. And get me Captain Morrison from Flight Operations. Is everything all right? David, what flight are we launching next month on our new Paris route? He checked his tablet. Flight SK001 San Francisco to Paris Charles de Gaulle. Our inaugural luxury service. Why do you ask? I want to pilot that flight personally. David looked surprised. Although I maintain my commercial pilot's license and flew regularly, I rarely took scheduled passenger flights anymore. As CEO, my time was better spent on strategic planning and business development. Any particular reason? Family business. Captain Morrison arrived 20 minutes later. At 58, he was one of my most experienced pilots and had been with Skyline since our second year of operations. Elena, David said you wanted to discuss the Paris inaugural flight? Jim, I want to pilot SK001 next month. Can you handle the co-pilot duties? Of course, but this is a bit unusual for you. Everything okay? I showed him the group chat messages. As someone who'd known me since the early days of building Skyline, Jim understood exactly what my family's dismissal meant to me. He whistled low. They have no idea, do they? None whatsoever. Well then, let's give them a flight they'll never forget. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing the passenger manifest for Flight SK001 when I saw the familiar names. Carmen Martinez, Isabella Martinez, Roberto Martinez, and his wife Sofia. Seats 1A through 1D in our Platinum first-class cabin, the most expensive seats on the aircraft at $15,000 each. They'd spared no expense for their family achievement celebration, apparently. I called David. I need you to do something for me regarding the Martinez party in first class. What do you need? Make sure they receive our absolute finest service. Champagne service before takeoff, the premium meal selection, extra attention from the flight attendants. I want this to be the most memorable flight of their lives. Understood. Anything else? Yes. Make sure they're settled and comfortable before I make the standard captain's welcome announcement. The day of the flight, I arrived at San Francisco Airport at 4 a.m. for our 7 a.m. departure. The new Skyline Airlines flagship lounge was already bustling with passengers enjoying complimentary champagne, gourmet breakfast, and spa services while they waited for their flights. I spotted my family across the lounge at exactly 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before departure. They were dressed to the nines, Mom in what looked like a $3,000 outfit, Isabella in designer everything, Roberto and Sophia looking like they were heading to a red carpet event rather than a transatlantic flight. They were taking selfies next to the Skyline Airlines logo, clearly excited to be flying on what industry magazines called the world's most luxurious airline. What they didn't know was that they were taking photos next to the logo I'd designed personally 7 years ago, when Skyline was just an ambitious dream and a small loan I'd taken against my pilot training savings. I watched them for a few minutes, hidden behind my aviator sunglasses and captain's uniform. They were talking animatedly about their Paris itinerary, the Ritz, Michelin-starred restaurants, shopping on the Champs-Élysées. The kind of luxury vacation they assumed I could never afford. If only they knew that I'd been to Paris 47 times in the past 3 years, mostly for business meetings with European aviation authorities and luxury hotel partnerships. At 6:15 a.m., I made my way to the aircraft for pre-flight preparations. The Airbus A350 was our newest addition to the fleet, customized with only 60 seats, all in various levels of first-class service. The platinum cabin where my family was sitting featured lie-flat beds, personal shower suites, and a dedicated chef preparing meals to order. Captain Morrison met me in the cockpit. Ready for this? More than ready. The passengers began boarding at 6:30. Through the cockpit window, I could see my family being escorted to their seats with the VIP treatment I'd requested. Mom was practically glowing as the flight attendant offered her champagne and explained the seat features. I heard Isabella's voice through the cabin speakers as the flight attendants made their welcome announcements. This is incredible. I can't believe we're flying on Skyline Airlines. Elena would die of jealousy if she could see this. At exactly 7 a.m., with all passengers seated and the cabin doors closed, I picked up the intercom microphone for the captain's welcome announcement. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard Skyline Airlines Flight SK001, our inaugural non-stop service from San Francisco to Paris Charles de Gaulle. I could see my family through the cockpit door, which was open according to our standard operating procedures during ground operations. They were chatting excitedly, champagne flutes in hand, completely absorbed in their luxury experience. I'm Captain Elena Martinez, and I'll be your pilot for today's 11-hour journey to the City of Light. I watched the champagne glass slip from my mother's hand. For those of you who may not be familiar with Skyline Airlines, we're the world's newest luxury carrier, founded 7 years ago with a simple mission: to make flying an experience worthy of your destination. Roberto was staring at the cockpit door, his mouth open in shock. As the founder and CEO of Skyline Airlines, I'm personally piloting today's inaugural flight because this route represents something very special to me: the expansion of our European service and our commitment to connecting families across the globe. Isabella had gone completely pale. We'll be cruising at 41,000 feet today with an estimated flight time of 10 hours and 55 minutes. The weather in Paris is beautiful, 22 degrees Celsius and sunny, perfect for exploring everything the city has to offer. My mother was frantically whispering to my father, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. I hope you'll enjoy our signature service today. Our cabin crew has prepared a special menu featuring dishes inspired by both California and French cuisine, paired with wines from our exclusive cellar. I could see Sophia, Roberto's wife, showing him something on her phone, probably looking up Skyline Airlines and confirming that yes, their sister-in-law really was the CEO. For our inaugural flight passengers, you'll find a special gift in your seat pocket: a commemorative certificate and a voucher for a complimentary future flight on any Skyline Airlines route. The irony was perfect. I was literally giving them free flights on the airline they assumed I could never afford to fly on. We'll begin our taxi to the runway shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and prepare for what I promise will be an unforgettable journey. I set down the intercom and looked at Captain Morrison, who was grinning broadly. Think they got the message? Oh, I think it's sinking in. Through the cockpit door I could see my family in heated, whispered conversation. Mom was gesturing frantically, Isabella was staring at her phone in disbelief, and Roberto kept looking toward the cockpit like he expected me to appear and explain what was happening. As we taxied toward the runway, the senior flight attendant, Patricia, came to the cockpit. "Captain Martinez? The passengers in 1A through 1D are asking to speak with you. They seem quite agitated. Tell them I'll be happy to meet with them once we reach cruising altitude. For now, I need to focus on getting us safely airborne." "Understood, Captain." The takeoff was flawless. As we climbed through 10,000 feet and I turned off the seatbelt sign, I made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our initial cruising altitude. You're now free to move about the cabin and begin enjoying our full-service amenities." I handed control to Captain Morrison and walked back into the cabin. The Platinum First Class section was near the front of the aircraft, just steps from the cockpit. My family's seats faced each other in a private pod configuration, giving them plenty of space for what was clearly going to be a very interesting conversation. "Hello everyone," I said, approaching their seats with a smile. My mother looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been awe. "Elena? Are you really the pilot and owner of this airline?" "Mom." "I am." Roberto stood up, nearly hitting his head on the cabin ceiling. "But how? We thought you were struggling with that pilot training thing." "I wasn't struggling, Roberto. I was building." Isabella found her voice. "Elena, I don't understand. You never said anything about owning an airline. We thought you were barely making ends meet with flying lessons." I settled into the empty seat across from them, seat 1E, which I'd kept available specifically for this conversation. "You thought I was struggling because you never asked about my actual life. You made assumptions based on stereotypes about people who choose unconventional careers." "But an airline?" Dad said, speaking for the first time since I'd sat down. "Do you have any idea how much money it takes to start an airline?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the Forbes article from 6 months ago, "The Sky Queen: How Elena Martinez Built an $8 billion Aviation Empire Before Age 30. Mom's eyes widened as she read the headline. $8 billion? The valuation has actually increased since then. We're looking at closer to $12 billion after our recent expansion into Asian markets. Sophia, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "Elena, I have to ask, why didn't you tell us? Why let us believe you were failing?" I looked around at my family, the people who were supposed to support my dreams but had instead spent years dismissing them as unrealistic and embarrassing. "Sophia, can I ask you something? In the 5 years since I started Skyline Airlines, how many times has anyone in this family asked me about my work?" She was quiet for a moment. I don't know." "0, I said. "Not once. Roberto asks about Isabella's law cases. Isabella asks about Roberto's medical practice. Mom and Dad ask about both of their achievements constantly. But nobody ever asked about mine." Roberto looked uncomfortable. We assumed there wasn't much to ask about. You assumed that because I chose aviation over medicine or law, I must not be successful. You assumed that because I spent money on flight training instead of designer clothes, I must be struggling financially." I gestured around the luxurious cabin. "This aircraft cost $350 million. I own 12 of them. Skyline Airlines operates 89 aircraft total, serving 45 destinations across 4 continents. We employ over 15,000 people and generate annual revenues of approximately $4 billion. The numbers hung in the air like a challenge. "But Elena," Mom said quietly, "you live in such a small apartment. You drive that old car. You dress so modestly." I laughed. "Mom, I live in a 4,000 square foot penthouse in Soma that I bought for $8 million. I drive a Tesla Model S because I prefer efficient, environmentally responsible transportation. And I dress modestly because I'm usually either in a pilot's uniform or business attire for meetings with aviation authorities and investors." "Show them the photos," Patricia, the flight attendant, suggested. She'd been listening from a respectful distance and I realized she was right. Sometimes seeing is believing. I scrolled through my phone and showed them pictures. The penthouse apartment with its panoramic city views, the private hangar where I kept my personal aircraft, photos from industry events where I was speaking to audiences of thousands, meetings with heads of state to discuss aviation partnerships. This is from last month, I said, showing them a photo of me shaking hands with the president of France. We were finalizing the agreement for our Paris hub. The same hub we're flying into today. Isabella stared at the photo. You met with the president of France? Several times. Also the prime ministers of the UK, Germany and Japan. When you're building international airline routes, you meet with a lot of government officials. The cabin was quiet except for the gentle hum of the engines. Outside the windows we were flying over the Pacific Ocean at 41,000 feet, the curvature of the Earth visible in the distance. Elena, Dad said finally, I owe you an apology. We all do. For what specifically? He looked around at the rest of the family before answering. For assuming that your dreams were less valuable than ours. For treating your career like a hobby. For excluding you from family celebrations because we thought you couldn't afford them. And for not asking, Mom added quietly. For 5 years, we never asked about your life because we decided in advance that it wasn't worth hearing about. Roberto nodded. I realize now that every time you tried to share something about your work, we changed the subject or made dismissive comments. We trained you to stop talking to us about your achievements. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of resentment I'd been carrying for years without fully realizing it. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can you forgive us? Isabella asked. Can we start over? I looked around at their faces, genuine remorse mixed with shock and what looked like newfound respect. It was the first time in years that my family was looking at me and seeing something other than a disappointment or a worry. I can forgive you, I said. But I need you to understand something. I didn't build this company to prove you wrong or to show off. I built it because I love aviation. I saw opportunities to make flying better for everyone, and I had the vision and determination to make it happen. We understand, Mom said. Do you? Because this conversation isn't happening because I got lucky or inherited money or stumbled into success. This is happening because I worked 18-hour days for 7 years, because I learned everything I could about business and aviation, and because I never let your doubts become my limitations. Patricia approached our seats. Captain Martinez? Captain Morrison says we're about to begin our descent into Paris. He'll need you back in the cockpit. I stood up. Duty calls. Elena, wait, Roberto said. After Paris, would you like to have dinner with us? We'd love to hear about your company. Really hear about it, I mean. I looked at him, my brother who had spent years dismissing my dreams as impractical and embarrassing. Now he was asking to learn about the business I'd built, the life I'd created, the success I'd achieved without his approval or support. I'd like that, I said. But Roberto? Yeah. When we have dinner, I want you to tell me about your medical practice because you're proud of it, not because you're trying to impress me. And I'll tell you about Skyline Airlines the same way. Deal. As I walked back toward the cockpit, Isabella called out, Elena? Yes. Thank you for the first-class treatment. This really is the most beautiful aircraft I've ever been on. I smiled. Wait until you see our new Dreamliner. It makes this look like economy. The landing in Paris was perfect, smooth as silk on a clear morning with the Eiffel Tower visible in the distance. As we taxied to the gate at Charles de Gaulle, I made my final announcement as captain. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Paris, the city of light. The local time is 2:15 p.m., and the temperature is a beautiful 24 degrees Celsius. I could see my family gathering their belongings, but moving slowly as if they were reluctant for the flight to end. For our inaugural flight passengers, I hope this journey has been as memorable for you as it has been for me. There's something magical about connecting people to the places and experiences that matter to them. I paused, looking toward their seats. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, we discover that the people who matter most have been right there with us all along. We just needed the right perspective to see them clearly. After the passengers deplaned, my family lingered at the gate. When I emerged from the cockpit, still in my captain's uniform, they were waiting for me. Elena, Mom said, we have a confession. What's that? We booked this trip partly to get away from what we thought was your failure. We wanted to celebrate our achievements without having to worry about you feeling left out or inadequate. I nodded. I figured as much. But now. She looked around at the Charles de Gaulle terminal with its soaring architecture and international bustle. Now we realize we were celebrating in your house. This terminal, this route, this entire experience, it's all something you created. With a lot of help from amazing employees and partners, yes. Dad stepped forward. Would you consider joining us for the rest of the vacation? We'd love to have you show us Paris from the perspective of someone who actually knows the city. I thought about it. I had planned to fly back to San Francisco on the return flight the next day. But I also had a standing invitation from the mayor of Paris to visit the new aviation museum, and there was a vineyard in Burgundy I'd been meaning to tour as a potential partner for our wine program. Actually, I said, I have a better idea. What if I show you the Paris that most tourists never see? The aviation museum, the private wine tastings, the restaurants that cater to airline executives and government officials. Isabella's eyes lit up. You mean like VIP Paris? I mean like Elena's Paris. The city I've come to know through 7 years of building international partnerships. We'd love that, Roberto said immediately. As we walked through the terminal toward passport control, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking with my family instead of despite them. The boy who'd wanted to exclude me from vacation because I couldn't afford first class was now eager to experience Paris through the eyes of someone who'd built relationships with French aviation authorities and luxury hospitality partners. The mother who'd assumed I was struggling was now looking at me with something approaching awe, finally understanding that her daughter hadn't failed at all. She'd succeeded beyond anything the family had imagined possible. 3 days later, as we sat at a private table at Jules Verne restaurant in the Eiffel Tower, a reservation I'd secured through my partnership with Air France, Roberto raised his champagne glass. To Elena, he said, who taught us that assumptions about success can blind us to the actual achievements happening right in front of us. And to family, I added, who can learn to see each other for who we really are, not who we expected each other to be. That night, flying back to San Francisco on Skyline Airlines Flight SK002, I sat in the jump seat in the cockpit, watching Captain Morrison handle the controls while I observed the familiar patterns of lights below. My phone buzzed with a message from the family group chat, which had been renamed Martinez Family Adventures, while we were in Paris. Isabella just posted photos from our Paris trip on social media. Elena, you're tagged in all of them. #Sistervo, #Skyline Airlines, #ProudFamily. Roberto. Elena, can we plan a family trip to Tokyo next year? I'd love to see your Asian operations. Mom, my daughter the airline owner. Still can't quite believe it but so incredibly proud. Dad, Elena, I've been reading about Skyline Airlines online. The employee satisfaction ratings, the environmental initiatives, the accessibility programs. You've built something really special. I typed back, thanks everyone. Love you all. See you for Sunday dinner at my place next week. I'll show you the view from the penthouse. As we flew through the night sky at 41,000 feet, I thought about the group chat message that had started everything. You can't afford first class anyway. They'd been wrong about so much more than just my ability to afford luxury travel. They'd been wrong about my capacity for success, my potential for leadership, and my ability to build something meaningful in the world. But they'd also been wrong about something else. They'd assumed that success would create distance between us, when in reality, it had created the opportunity for a deeper, more honest relationship built on mutual respect instead of assumptions. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. But sometimes, if you're very fortunate, living well becomes the foundation for healing relationships that seemed broken beyond repair. And as I watched the sunrise paint the sky ahead of us, flying home in the aircraft I'd designed, operated by the airline I'd built, surrounded by the family who finally saw me for who I really was, I realized that this felt better than any revenge I could have imagined. The girl they'd left behind in San Francisco had been transformed during that 11-hour flight to Paris. Not because I'd changed, but because they'd finally opened their eyes to see the woman I'd been all along.